You know that we do have water issues in this country. It is not just Flint, Michigan. There are many other places that have similar issues when it comes to access to water, clean water, drinking water. And Jackson, Mississippi is now one of those places as well. So I want to give a shout out to Case Study QB for clipping this, because we need to find out, why has this happened in Jackson, Mississippi? Why are they without drinking water? Why is the water that they have not clean? This has actually been an issue that has basically been building up to this moment. This could have been resolved. This could have been prevented if the state and the federal government would have taken the proper measures years ago when they knew that this was going to be an issue, instead of choosing to be reactive. So let's go ahead and get into this clip here.
All right, let's bring in Tom Foreman to explain why there is a water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. Shall we, Berman?
I just look like Tom Foreman. We all look alike. Tom Foreman, go for it. Why is there a water crisis there?
Listen, the reason there's a water crisis there is it's been building up for a long, long time. Yeah, all eyes right now are on this emergency pump that's been brought in, on all the efforts to try to get just enough water flowing there. But you got 150,000 people waiting for this in this town. This is the biggest city in the whole state. This is a big issue. What caused it? Damage to pumps in the main water treatment facility earlier this year, flooding of the Pearl River. Those are the proximate causes. Just because it's worth explaining and understanding why that works. You say, how can flooding cause a problem like this? Imagine if you have this water pipe representing all the miles of water pipe in that town. When you have flooding, the water coming in is usually full of more particulate, needs more treating. Well, if your plants aren't working well, that can get into the system. Even if you somehow can get everything working well enough to clean it and get it moving through the system as usual, every single place that it requires that there might be a leak in the line, if you don't have positive pressure to force clean water this direction, out, if it's going to go out anywhere, then what that does is it allows all that flood water to come into the system that's in the ground, all those contaminants. You have to have positive pressure. So a failure here affects the whole system. That's why they were talking about the idea of having to pump out a big tank and refill it, because once it's in the system, very, very hard to get it out.
Okay, let's go back to something he said here about the plants, because this is really the root of the problem. Listen to what he says here.
Yeah, all eyes right now are on this emergency pump that's been brought in, on all the efforts to try to get just enough water flowing there. But you got 150,000 people waiting for this in this town. This is the biggest city in the whole state. This is a big issue. What caused it? Damage to pumps in the main water treatment facility earlier this year, flooding of the Pearl River. Those are the proximate causes. Just because it's worth explaining and understanding why that works. You say, how can flooding cause a problem like this? Imagine if you have this water pipe representing all the miles of water pipe in that town. When you have flooding, the water coming in is usually full of more particulate, needs more treating. Well, if your plants aren't working well.
If your plants aren't working well. So that has been an issue for a long time. That didn't just happen. So they knew that there was a problem with the plants in Jackson, Mississippi. Why did the state step in to fix those plants? Why did they wait until it just build up over time? And now we have the issue that we have now, where people don't have enough water in Jackson, Mississippi. This is something that I've noticed when it comes to our government, the way our government operates in this country. They tend to be reactive instead of proactive. Now, some would say that they're trying to find ways to save money. But looking at the damage that is done now, are they really saving money? It's actually going to cost more to fix what has just happened now with the water crisis. And you still at some point are going to have to go back in and you're going to have to rebuild those plants. Those plants need to be rebuilt, obviously. So they're really not saving any money. They're just buying time. And then eventually, until the bubble bursts And now we have the situation that we have today. Let's go back in.
That can get into the system, even if you somehow can get everything working well enough to clean it and get it moving through the system as usual. Every single place that it requires that there might be a leak in the line, if you don't have positive pressure to force clean water this direction, out, if it's going to go out anywhere, then what that does is it allows all that flood water to come into the system that's in the ground, all those contaminants. You have to have positive pressure. So a failure here affects the whole system. That's why they were talking about the idea of having to pump out a big tank and refill it, because once it's in the system, very, very hard to get it out. Beyond the immediate cause of that flooding and the failed pumps, outdated and neglected infrastructure. This has been going on for years and years.
Outdated and neglected infrastructure. And he goes on to say, this has been going on for years. Our country does not have proper infrastructure. The infrastructure in the United States has been falling apart for years. And this is something that, look, local officials here have to be held accountable as well, not just the federal government. This is something that local officials, local politicians, they've just allowed this to happen over time. They've allowed infrastructure to fall apart. They knew that it was failing and didn't do what they needed to do to prevent something like this from happening. Outdated and neglected infrastructure. Staffing issues at the water plant. Limited resources to fix. I'll let him go on.
People there. Everyone acknowledges this is a long-term problem, didn't just show up. They've dealt with smaller versions of it before. Staffing issues at the water plant and limited resources to fix it all. Now, there's a lot of talk about resources out there, federal, state, local, people trying to get money in there to do repairs. After last year, the state gave Jackson $3 million, $20 million in funding from COVID relief package, $75 million bipartisan infrastructure law funding. All of this could help. But look at what the mayor says. It would take $1 billion to fully repair and replace this system. Nobody is fooling themselves about this, John and Brianna. They are saying what is happening there right now was a long, long time in coming, and fixing it could also be a pretty long-term process.
Yeah.
Now, he says it will take over $1 billion to fix the problem, but maybe if they would have taken care of this years ago, maybe it wouldn't have cost $1 billion. This is what happens when you let infrastructure you neglect it over time. Same thing, not just with these water plants as well, but also this happens with bridges as well. There are bridges here in Boston that are really old that I've been saying for a while. They need to do something about these bridges. There's potholes on the bridge. How do you get a pothole in the bridge? So instead of fixing the problem, it's almost like they wait until something goes wrong. And then they say, okay, let's get the money from the state and try to fix it. See, now they don't really have an option. Now the state is like, well, we have to do something about it now, but this could have been prevented. And this is something I've been trying to tell people before when the crisis happened in Flint, that it was not just Flint. There are other towns and other cities in the United States that have water issues. And I'm going to show you something after this clip about the demographics of Jackson, Mississippi, that I feel plays a huge part in why this was neglected. So let's go back in.
Yeah, look, they may get past this immediate crisis. They may have water they can drink sometime soon, but that doesn't fix the problem long term, Tom.
No,
That's
no.
right.
I mean, well, think about how many miles of pipe go under. This is a moderate-sized city. If you get under a huge city, it's a normal, not a huge amount beyond that. And bear in mind, the American Society of Civil Engineers has been saying for a long time, that the drinking water infrastructure in this country everywhere is under tremendous pressure. It is not being maintained the way that they think it should be maintained.
That's a warning sign. I told you guys about this when Congress was going through that infrastructure bill, when they were talking about the Infrastructure Act. And I actually went through that and I showed you guys what Congress, what they were asking for, and what the American Society of Civil Engineers are telling us that we need to have. what Congress was asking for wasn't even half of what the American Society of Civil Engineers were saying that we needed to have just to maintain the infrastructure, not even to fix it, just to maintain it. So he brought up the American Society of Civil Engineers, and I'm glad he brought that up on CNN. More people need to look at that website. There's a lot of information on there. They grade our infrastructure system in the United States, and it's not a good rating. As FYI, last time I checked, I think it was a D. So these are things that should have been taken care of. He says here in this chart, made up of 2.2 million miles of underground pipes, the system is aging and underfunded. Water main breaks every 2 minutes. Estimated 6 billion gallons of treated water lost each day. Enough to fill 9,000 plus swimming pools. This is absolutely horrific. All of this water being wasted every day. Every day.
It's going to take a lot more to take that aging system up to a modern system all over the place. Look at a water main break every 2 minutes in this country. So what we're looking at in Jackson may be unique to the problems of Jackson, but many, many cities around the country have to be looking at that saying, is that our future if we don't find a way to deal with the problems all over the place, where too often it's easy to neglect the work that needs to be done right now because it's not glamorous, it's expensive, it's difficult.
He says it's not glamorous, it's expensive, it's difficult. A lot of things are expensive, but they find ways to pay for those things. I think that if this would have happened, first of all, I don't think it would happen in a wealthier neighborhood, wealthier zip code. But let's say it did. I think the state would have found ways to pay for it. Same thing with Flint. So I don't like the it's too expensive excuse, because other things that they consider to be more important in other communities that they consider to be more important, all of a sudden the expensive issue isn't a problem.
But then pay a price for it later.
Tom Foreman, thank you very much for explaining the situation.
So we need to talk about this, because one question that I have, if the system is old and aging, obviously that system needs to be replaced. If you've had those pipes for as long as you have had them, and it seems like they've been there for a long time, then 9 times out of 10, the drinking water, which is being pumped through those pipes, is not safe. So here we go again in this country. Here we go again. First Flint, now Jackson, Mississippi. But both of those cities actually have something in common. Let's look at the demographics of Jackson, Mississippi. Let's get into that. Oh, we're doing it tonight. We're going there. Now, this is according to the United States Census Bureau. Jackson, Mississippi. Let's scroll down and take a look at the peeps. Here we go. Population as of July 1st, 2021. They probably haven't done the census for this year yet. Whoopsies. That's way too big. Okay. 149,761 people. Age and sex. The majority of the population, 54% women. People 65 and older is 13%. People under 18, 24.5%. And people under 5 years old, 7.1%. Here's the kicker. Race and Hispanic origin. In Jackson, Mississippi, 16.2% of the population are white. 82.5% of the population in Jackson, Mississippi is Black and African American alone. 82 82%. One more group, another one I want to show you right here. Hispanic or Latino, 1.3%. White alone, not Hispanic or Latino percent, 15.4%. Asian percent, 0.3. American Indian, Alaska Native alone, 0.1. And Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, 0.0%. Two or more races, 0.7%. But the number that I want you to pay attention to is right here, that 82.5% of the population in Jackson, Mississippi is Black or African American. Ladies and gentlemen, similar to Flint, where the majority of the residents are African American, let's go to income. I'm going to circle back. Let's go to income because we're going to connect it all. Let's go down here. Economy, transportation, income, and poverty. The median household income, now this was 2016 to 2020, $40,064. Or excuse me, $40,064. Okay. Per capita income in the past 12 months, 22,815. Persons in poverty, 24.5%. Now, let's look at the income again. Median household income, a little over $40,000. The majority of people that live in Jackson, Mississippi, racially, 82.5% are African American. Do you see a connection? This is obviously a city that is not a wealthy city. Looking at that income, and we can look at the jobs as well. Looking at that income, probably working class. Poverty is 24.5. There's poor neighborhoods as well. But the majority of the people living in Jackson are also African American. I believe the reason why the city chose not to fix that problem many years ago when they should have is because of the people that represent the community. These are not wealthy people. I'm telling you, money can buy a lot. These are not wealthy people. 24.5% poverty rate. And the majority of the residents are African American. They don't care about those groups. Do you see what I mean? They're willing to allow poor people, working class people, Black working class, poor people. They are willing to allow them to struggle, to suffer. There's no urgency in trying to fix those communities. There's no urgency in trying to fix the plants in a community that is predominantly Black, in a community where the median income is a little over $40,000 a year. There's no sense of urgency. But I can tell you, and let's get into it. Would this have happened in Beverly Hills? Would this have happened in Potomac Mills, Maryland? No. These things happen in poor, working class, usually predominantly African American communities, because they are not seen as important. I'm sorry, but we have to say it. It is what it is. Because if there had been an issue with the water in Beverly Hills, they would have fixed it immediately. They have to, because they have to protect wealth. Because when you protect wealth, you protect capital. You see what I mean? There's no profit in them helping poor people. There's no profit in them helping working class people. There's none. There's nothing in it for the city. There's nothing in it for the state. So they purposely allowed for those plants, knowing that they were already fragile, they purposely allowed them to fall apart. We all got to call it out. And it's not just Jackson, Mississippi. It's not just Flint, Michigan. It can also be a Baltimore, Maryland. Let's be real. When did people really start caring about, let's try to fix these communities and make communities nicer in Washington, D.C. before it was gentrified? No, they started caring about that after it was gentrified. When it was like 80% African American, they did not care. We have to know that when I tell you, when it comes to issues, when it comes to the climate issues, when it comes to the water issues, and everybody needed to pay attention to this because I told you last year about the water issue. They don't care if we die. They don't care if poor people get sick and die. They see poor people as disposable, by the way. Most of the time, and by they, I mean our government, most of the time, when they look at poor people, they kind of blame poor people for their own state of affairs. They think that it's their fault that they're poor. They don't care about the poor people. So if poor people die in Jackson, Mississippi, they don't care. If Black people die in Jackson, Mississippi, they don't care. They are going to protect what brings them money, what brings them revenue. They're going to protect wealth and capital at all costs. Go into the wealthier neighborhoods and you would not see this. You do not see this here in Lexington, Massachusetts, in Concord, Massachusetts. You don't see it. You have to go out to the poor neighborhoods, the poor rural areas of Massachusetts. You have to go out there to see that. They neglect the people. They let it fall apart. They don't care. And you can connect this to the housing issue as well. Because when you see the city allow for public housing communities to fall apart, the building is falling apart, the ceiling is separating from the wall, which I've seen in person. They're not trying to fix it. They don't care if your building falls apart. In fact, they probably want it to fall apart so you can be forced to move out of the building and they can tear it down and build a luxury condo. That's how it works. All about money. Never forget that. I'm going to go to some of the comments here in the chat. Chris says, I'm sure this would never happen in a nicer upper class neighborhood. No, they don't have these issues. They don't have it. Chris says they just gave Ukraine $54 billion. Exactly, right? Is the federal government trying to help people in Jackson, Mississippi? Now, see, this is where the federal government could step in. If the state says we don't have the funds, this is where the federal government could step in and say, we need to send emergency relief to people in Jackson, Mississippi immediately. And we need to send money so that they can build the new water plants because the ones they have now, they got to go. We need to do that. Won't do that for the American people, but you can send the money to people in Ukraine who we've never even met. Meow says pretty much all native reservations have unclean water. That's sad, Meow. Pete says we have water mains from the 1800s here in Philly. A lot of them are old here in Boston too. Like, the infrastructure in this country is terrible. Oh, one more thing I do want to show you about this on this census. I forgot to point out. Look at education. High school graduate or higher persons 25 and up, 86.8%. Bachelor's degree or higher percent of persons aged 25 years and up, 28.4%. So like I said, the majority of the people in Jackson and Mississippi, the majority is not like people with professional, college degrees. The majority of them looks like probably got a job, started working right after high school. Again, they don't care about those people. They don't care. If they don't see that you're profitable for them, they don't care. And you can add the police to that too. Because police protect wealth and capital. They don't really protect people in poor neighborhoods.